Welcome to the Sweaty Pillow Podcast. Today we have our first ever returning guest because this is how special she is and how important this topic is. We've got Abida Dhukai here today. Abida is a nurse practitioner for science and humans based out of Toronto since 2022 and really renowned and a specialist in women's health, specifically cardiovascular disease, exercise physiology, and hormone replacement therapy. I'm going to continue because it's just so impressive. PhD from the University of Toronto, focused again women's health on cardiovascular disease, exercise physiology, women's health, ethnicity, and quantitative policy research. Committee member of the Canadian Women's Heart Health Alliance, and an adjunct professor at the U of T, and so much more. But clearly, you're an absolute expert to talk about this particular topic with, and we're so grateful to have you back. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really nice being back.
Great. We're so excited because today we're really pulling back the covers to an important topic. Through this process, I've become a personal champion of hormone replacement therapy, which is one of the areas of women's health that you specialize in. And we are going to expose my personal health, all of my labs, pre and post, my hormone replacement protocol, and really dig into much more detail on the specifics, the benefits, and the risk factors. And that's, look forward to digging into that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So we first met, you were the inaugural guest in our podcast, and it was just so compelling. And we've also got so many women that have viewed and benefited already from our initial podcast. But I wanted to get into just more research around the risks and the benefits of hormone replacement therapy, and of course, the study that set us so far back, the Women's Health Initiative, 20-ish years ago. So take us through your point of view and the research that you have on hormone replacement therapy.
So let's go back to the Women's Health Initiative. In the early 2000s, late 1990s, they came out with a study. It was supposed to be a study following women for about 8.5 years. And so they stopped it, I think, at around 5 years into the study because they said, oh, no, it's increasing the risk of breast cancer and strokes and heart attacks and blood clots. And so they stopped it immediately. And that study, I think changed how women receive care. Because before then, women were on HRT and to help with their symptoms of hot flashes and night sweats and brain fog. And so when that study came out, everybody, like all the doctors, stopped it. And so women were like, oh my God, what's going on, when they started feeling really good with the treatment. And so the studies had actually a few flaws in it. One, they were doing it on women who were 10 years postpartum, right? Postmenopausal, sorry.
Okay.
And when you do that, when you have women who are postmenopausal for a really long time, their risks of high cholesterol go up, your high blood pressure goes up, and then putting them on all these medications that are synthetic, increase the risk. So when they did the studies and when they actually did a review of the data, they found that none of it was actually statistically significant, but they stopped it. And so that's the other thing. They looked at the data and they said, oh, this is a relative risk and not an absolute risk. And so if you don't understand the nuances of statistics, then you don't get that piece. But the data actually was not statistically significant. But I think it scared them enough that they said, we're going to stop. And so the treatment that they were offering was oral hormone replacement. So the oral hormone replacement is synthetic. It's created by male horse urine, whereas the bioidentical, which is now what's coming through, matches what is in our bodies. And so if you put something synthetic like a progestin, as
Mhm,
opposed to
mhm,
progesterone, it increases the risk of stroke and breast cancers and things like that. You put an like in a synthetic estrogen as opposed to an estradiol, and
mhm,
if you give estrogen as an oral, it increases the risk of stroke. But if you give it as a topical, it's protective against
mm,
heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, all the negative things that showed up with the Women's Health Initiative.
mhm,
Because
mhm,
a plant based hormone that matches what's in your body, how can it's already in your body, right? So, how can that
mhm,
potentially increase your risk? But it was because the study used synthetic hormones. That's what increased the risk. And now what's happening is they're slowly now I think women have become more prevalent and stronger advocates for themselves because women weren't included in research studies before the 1990s. We respond
unbelievable.
to medications very differently than men do. We're not,
Mhm,
we're not the same as men, right?
mhm,
Our
mhm,
physiology, our and how we metabolize medications is very different. We require altered doses. So when they started doing research on women, unfortunately, this one was the one that, it was big, but it was so
yeah,
flawed. And I think
mm,
it's created a lot of uh, disadvantages for women. And so now that women are advocating for themselves, and now that people are understanding, wait a second, there is a difference between bioidentical and synthetic hormones. So now there's smaller studies that are coming out that actually show the protective effects of bioidentical hormones, which is great. It
mhm, mhm,
helps with
mhm,
brain fog. What they're finding is it reduces the risk of dementia, especially if you start hormone replacement, bioidentical hormone replacement, sort of in the perimenopause phase, which is fantastic, right? Because
yeah,
women tend to live longer and they tend to live longer with cognitive impairment.
mhm, mhm,
Also, women live longer with cardiovascular disease, right? And it's
mhm,
because
mhm,
estrogen is so protective against um, uh, negative cardiac outcomes, right? Heart
mhm,
disease and heart failure and things like that, and arrhythmias. And so they didn't
mhm,
realize that as women go through the perimenopause, menopause transition, the reason for that is because they don't have enough estrogen, and it can
yeah,
cause regular heart rates. It's like, oh, look, if we fix that, if we fix the hormone imbalance, will that get their heart rate back? Because a lot of women who have irregular heartbeats are put on blood thinners, right, for the rest of their lives,
mhm, mhm.
and increases their risk if they fall. They have increased risk of bleeding and or a stomach bleed. So you know the downstream effects are significant if we're not really addressing the main reasons behind women's health issues.
It's really important for us to go really deep into the health risk factors that limit quality of life or could end our life. But excuse me, a lot of the symptoms that I was complaining about and peers of mine were complaining about were generally speaking fatigue, weight gain, goofy, ridiculous things like my hair is thinning, but no joke, that's important to women as they're seeing their bodies change and not feeling great. And my memory or the brain fog, those were all things that were on my mind. And we complain about sitting in our book club, but there are major risk factors with you mentioned cardiovascular health and how critical it is and how at risk women are with cardiac health even more than breast cancer. So can you speak more to the, life-threatening risk factors of women in perimenopause and then menopause and post if we don't address this?
So the long-term side effects, right? So weight gain, yes, aesthetically, you're like, wait a second, because your estrogen,
Yeah.
progesterone, and testosterone levels start being affected. So you don't have the same metabolism. So you gain weight. When you gain weight, you increase the risk of diabetes, right? And then once you go down that trajectory, increased diabetes risk goes, does it cause kidney issues? Does it cause cardiovascular problems? You know, not having a good amount of metabolism, it impairs how well your body manages its blood pressure. It impairs how well your heart's being regulated. It, also it the bioidenticals, now that they're doing smaller studies, they're coming through and they're actually showing that it reduces the risk of breast cancer. And isn't that fantastic? Right?
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
very protective. These are small studies, but and so we obviously need larger studies to sort of confirm these data, but the studies are very strong and very positive. Dementia, like I mentioned, because we have estrogen receptors everywhere in our bodies. So
Mhm.
a lot of women say, "Oh, I've got some like frozen shoulder pain." Guess what?
Yeah.
We have estrogen receptors in our joints. And when we
Mhm.
don't have enough estrogen, you get joint pain. Some
Yeah.
women find that they get itchy ears or they get tinnitus, which is ringing in the
Mhm.
ears. We have estrogen receptors in our skin. And so while some women will say, you know what, I've got like this crawling skin, like it's just like ants on my skin are crawling. It's because you don't have enough estrogen. And then they go into their family doctor and say, "Hey, I've got all this like really pins and needles pain or like severe pain in my joints and my skin." And then they get put on um, medications like nerve pain medication. Well, sometimes those nerve pain medications can have negative side effects. It can make them feel dizzy and lightheaded and really groggy, and increase the risk of fall. So there's a lot of downstream effects that I find that we potentially can prevent if we get women started on a regimen sooner rather than later. And the hair also,
Yeah.
because some
Yeah.
women find, especially in the perimenopause, when their periods are still there, but they're like, they say, my periods are super heavy. They're shortened, but they're like, I can't, it's just really, 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 really heavy. Well, guess what? When you have such heavy flow, your iron gets depleted and you need iron
Mm.
to support your hair,
Mm.
right? Your
Mm.
energy levels, right? And so if you've
Mhm.
got low iron, then that's a problem, right? Because then you feel exhausted and you're like, "Well, my
Yeah.
thyroid is fine." Yeah, but is your iron level like, have they dramatically decreased and now you're feeling exhausted and wiped out,
Mm.
right? And that's because your
Yeah.
period's out of whack. So do we put you on hormone replacement and get your periods regulated, get them into a
Mhm.
nice, light flow, normal days in terms of your cycles, and then get those iron stores to come back, and the estrogen and the progesterone is also important for hair growth and
Mhm.
supporting that. So if we get all that balance, then hair is something that's important, right? So you see a lot of
Yeah.
women who are older and they don't have enough hair, right? And so you're
Yeah.
like, "Wait a second, that's not aesthetically." It's important, right? Because if you don't feel good about the way you look, then it's gonna affect your body image, and psychologically, it's not good for women, right? So
For sure.
I think in addition to the physical effects that balancing your hormones has, it has a huge effect on your self-worth and body
Mhm.
image and confidence, and I think that's really important for women too.
I'm connecting the dots on how you explained the flaws in the Women's Health Initiative study, and that the fact that it was done on women 10 years postmenopausal, whereas I'm being dramatic to make a point. What if every single woman at whatever age, call it 45 for fun, started to understand her hormone levels and started some progressive protocol on hormone therapy before full menopause kicks in? What could the benefits be to women's health?
Oh my god. So could you imagine? Women will not feel joint pains, plantar fasciitis. They won't have, I can't work out because my knees are really hurting me, my hips are really hurting me, my shoulder, I can't swim, which is something that, some women are really
Mm,
it's their daily routine, right? And if
yeah,
you got a frozen shoulder, how are you gonna swim? Um, I think I think the conversation actually needs to be happening sooner. I
yeah.
think, when women turn into their 20s, and I think that's what's really important. A lot of women who are hitting that perimenopause, menopause transition are having children and girls in their 20s and 25s and 30s, right? So this is a time where we should start speaking to younger women to say, "Hey, listen,
Mhm.
guess what? It's important for you to be healthy in the first third of life, but what are we doing to protect you in the last two-thirds of life?" Right? And so talking to them saying, "Hey, listen, if you're starting to have symptoms, it's probably a good idea to advocate for yourself to see what your hormones are. And if you need to be started earlier on hormone replacement, absolutely." Right? And it's a safe option for women because
Mhm.
remember, women can go through perimenopause 7 to 10 years before they actually go through menopause.
Right? It's like you wanna stay ahead of it and keep your function higher while you still can, rather than hit the skids, wait 10 years, and think somehow putting an estrogen patch is gonna save your life at that point. Like, get way ahead of it.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? Could you imagine what the downstream effects would be now that we've got women who are sort of in that perimenopause, menopause transition, starting to do something that's very protective and
Yeah.
preventative? And I hope to foresee a future where there's fewer incidences of heart disease in women and fewer incidences of
Mhm.
obesity and knee replacements and hip replacements and dementia.
Mm.
Women who are living longer and stronger, right? Reduce the risk of osteoporosis because if we're able to maintain our muscle mass, you maintain your balance, you reduce your risk of falls, you reduce your risk of, and if you can keep your muscle mass on, it reduces your risk of osteoporosis and fractures, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people who have hip fractures tend to have a shorter lifespan from what I've seen in my experience.
Mhm.
It's because it limits their mobility, right? And
Yeah.
they're older and they're afraid of falling. So they move less. Even though people attend physiotherapy and rehab, it's just a significant decline. So could you imagine the downstream prevention that we're sort of gonna affect if we get
Mhm.
women to do treatment that's, very preventative? And, a lot of women blame themselves saying, "Hey, I don't know why I've gained all this weight. I guess, I'm stressed out.
Mhm.
Not taking care of myself. I'm eating terribly." But then when you actually sit down and talk to women and say, "Okay, how are you eating?" It's like, "I'm not eating any different than I did 10 years ago. I'm still exercising." Some women are exercising
Mhm.
5, 6, 7 days a week. And they're like, "I just can't get the weight off. Or I
Yeah.
can't get my energy levels up. I can't get my muscle mass going." And they're like, I'm so exhausted." And it's not anything that they're doing. It's usually a misbalance in their hormones.
It's amazing to me that I'm thinking back to grade 7 girls' health class where there's so much booklets, pamphlets on us about to get our period and us about to have the changes in our body and our ability to conceive children. There's so much pre-work on. I remember like getting samples of pads in health class and like, what the hell is this about? Every girl's gonna get her period. Every woman's gonna go through a menopausal transition, which is way more significantly negative health impacts to our quality of life and our life expectancy. Yet nobody's talking about this in our annual physicals with our doctors who have 8 hours of training in med school about menopause.
Yeah, and
It's
that's
so it's so broken.
isn't it really interesting that,
Yeah,
everything is focused on the first, like I said, the first third of life, but what about the last two-thirds of life, which
yeah,
is
yeah.
with people living with chronic disease for so long? Why aren't we doing something about that?
Mhm.
And this is a potential sort of path that we should look at as well and not exclude, you know. But I think
Absolutely.
I think a lot of women still are fearful because they say, I've got a long-standing family history of breast cancer, and
Mhm,
so
mhm.
Yes, and so I think absolutely something to speak to oncologists about, making sure that you get genetic testing done, because that
Mhm,
is something, because they haven't done studies on women who have had breast cancer who are on
mhm.
hormone replacement therapy, because I don't think you can, ethically get that, um,
Right.
research approved. That's the thing.
Mhm,
But so for topical, but women who have had breast cancer can actually get vaginal estrogen and progesterone treatments because
mhm.
it's local treatment, right? So women who
Okay.
have vaginal dryness, who complain of, you know, like they always have like a urinary tract infection or painful intercourse.
Mhm,
Those are things that can actually be treated with vaginal treatments, which is
hmm.
great. So women who have had breast cancer, it's not something that they can't access. It's just we have to tweak it for what their needs are and what their history is, and just to make sure that we're prescribing things that are safe for them, because we don't want to prescribe things that we know that we don't have evidence for,
Right.
right? And so hopefully, we can get some evidence to help some of these women who are also suffering.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Definitely. I want to talk about now, just starting the conversation initially that you and I had on my own personal health
Mhm.
and my personal risk factors, and just expose everyone to my results through this. I was feeling crappy. I wasn't sleeping, brain fog, joint pain, um, night sweats, miserable, and just like wanted to murder people, especially when I was driving. Like, it wasn't normal. And my kids were like, okay, mom, that chill out. It's not worth that level of reaction. But my mental health wasn't great. And back to, doctors gaslighting us. I had a doctor that was like, I am not feeling great. Um, let's call it some mild form of depression, but they actually recommended antidepressants. I'm like, no, give me a break. Like, I'm not doing that. I have a very happy, there's no reason in my life to have any type of even acute depression, but that's the go to. Oh, a complaining woman in, like, a 50-year-old woman, if she's not happy, it's not hormones, it's give her some antidepressants. So I was just horrified. But in general, I wasn't feeling well. You said, let's check your labs, let's get a full panel. And I actually love that, because that is also a controversial step. It's very thorough, and I loved it because I like data and I wanted to see measurements. Like, how bad could it be, right? Um, Whereas some clinics, some doctors may not take that type of rigor, but you're like, no, we're going to do a full panel. So February 2024, we did the full panel. You got the results. You called me, and I'll never forget. You're like, well, it's certainly an opportunity for improvement, but it wasn't just my hormones, which is, I thought I am great except for estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone probably are low. But it wasn't just that. It was, Larry, your iron's not great. Your bad cholesterol, not great. There was a whole bunch of factors on there that just shocked me. And had I not had you in my life, and had I not had those labs, we wouldn't even know the baseline and where I was starting from. It was really shocking and concerning. And there is a history of breast cancer in my family with my younger sister and a maternal aunt. So every other doctor said, you can't even walk by a display on hormone replacement therapy. It's so risky for you. So that's from the world I was dealing with in February of this year. So you have my result. Do you want to, like, let's just read them out
Yeah, yeah,
on my baseline of
sure.
where I was.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we spoke, we've got full permission to talk about your results.
Yes. Yep.
You had a bit of fatty liver, or your liver
Yep.
function tests were up a little bit, and your cholesterol was high. And that's because you didn't have enough estrogen to help with the metabolism of, the fat in your body. And so,
Mhm.
and in addition, your iron was really low. You know, it was 53. I usually like iron levels to be above 70, even though 50 is the new cutoff.
Mhm.
But it can affect hair, it can affect energy, it can affect, you know, a lot of your function, right? Your sugars were okay, your good cholesterol was good. Your B12 levels are okay too. And then your thyroid was fine. So we did a full panel because a lot of
Mhm.
these hormones are all intermingled, right? So if your thyroid levels are off, your hormones could also be off. But,
Mhm.
you know, good thing yours weren't. And then your progesterone was low. And so a lot of women come to us and say, hey, my family doctor says I don't need progesterone because I've had a hysterectomy, a partial hysterectomy. Well, progesterone is important for prevention of endometrial cancer when you do hormone replacement. And so a lot of doctors think, oh, you don't have a uterus, so we don't have to worry about that. But progesterone is also important for so many other things. So for
Mhm. Mhm.
sleep and mood. So your progesterone is low, so we gave you something to help you sleep. And the progesterone, your results shows that you responded really nicely, right? So your
Mhm.
progesterone was
Mhm.
really low. And here's the other thing, testosterone was low. And a lot of women don't understand that we actually make estrogen from testosterone, right? And so they're like, "Wait a
Yeah.
second, testosterone's a male hormone." No, it's not. It's actually a
Mhm.
hormone that's found in women and men, which is really important because testosterone's anti-inflammatory. It's
Mhm.
important for joint health. It's important for metabolism. It's important for muscle mass, right? And we want to make sure
Mhm.
your muscle mass is really good. And your estrogen levels were less than ideal, which is probably the reason why you're having the brain fog, right? Because we
Yeah.
have estrogen receptors in our brain. And so they did a study, I think it's in July of 2023, where they actually scanned women's brains who were perimenopausal, and then they gave them estrogen, and the parts of the brain that were responsible for memory actually expanded with the
Huh.
estrogen replacement, and women's cognitive function improved. So when you get older and you have dementia, parts of your brain start shrinking, right?
Mm.
And so those cognitive um the the electrical connections are not as strong as they were. So it leads to a reduction in sort of higher level of functioning and memory and things like that. So and giving you estrogen, I think, helped with the joint pain because we got the estrogen receptors saturated again. We got the
Mhm.
receptors in the brain saturated again. And also estrogen and progesterone are important for mood, right? And so once we
Yeah. Yeah.
balance those out, you're like, wait a second, I feel like myself again. It's like, yeah, because a lot of women come to us and say, we're angry, like in a way that we haven't recognized ourselves. This is not us. And some women have said, you've saved our marriage because we're married to, or we've had great partners who are
Yeah.
wonderful. It's just, I've become a person I don't recognize. And so,
Mm.
so this is really important, right? So for your mood. So I'm glad you became an advocate for yourself in terms
Mhm.
of not being put on an antidepressant because that wasn't the root cause of what you didn't have a serotonin deficiency. You had an estrogen
Mhm.
progesterone deficiency, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's when we replace that, things get better. And it did take a little bit of sort of finessing to see what was the right regimen
Mm.
for you, right? And so it does take women, I wanna say 6 to 9 months for us to figure out exactly what the right dose is, but, some women need a patch, some women need a
Yeah.
cream, some women, do a progesterone pill, some women do a progesterone cream. It really depends on what works best for you and what
Right.
works best for your life, right? And so taking oral progesterone is very safe. It's
Mhm.
just the oral estrogen we don't recommend because that increases the risk of blood clots.
So it's really interesting to add to the context of the amount of stress that I manage in my life. And this is always someone externally going, geez, like you've got a lot going on, whether it's, you know, being an entrepreneur, running a business, I'm open about having a child with special needs and the demands on that. And, just experiencing the death of my father in the last couple of years, or, all of the complexities that we deal with as that sandwich generation that you and I've talked about, not having quality time for myself, whereas I'm envious of some of my girlfriends that have been able to retire. So you talk about having that balance, and they can go to yoga and they can spend 3 months a year in Arizona. Like, none of that is happening. I have a high level of stress. So my risk factors, how I was feeling, and by the way, the cholesterol was freaky because I'm a plant-based eater. So there
Mhm.
was no reason that I should have high cholesterol other than my hormones. So it wasn't a good picture. We are now going to um, take a break and end this series one of a two-part series of our podcast, because we are then going to go into what you prescribed for me and my journey, and then the end result of where I am now and just the data around my lab. So thank you for this incredible session, and look forward to the next one on getting into my results.
Yeah, absolutely.